The Community Preservation Committee doles out dollars on this episode of Barnstable Today. It's Wednesday, March 28, 2012. I'm Sarah Colvin. A number of projects received funding from the Community Preservation Committee this week, including the Tracer Museum, the Old Selectmen's Building, the Hyannis Public Library, and the JFK Museum. The committee met Monday afternoon. First on the agenda was a request for nearly $218,000 to fund repairs at the Tracer Heritage Museum in Barnstable Village. A grant to help pay for the repairs was recently announced.
We did receive a letter from Mark Marnaccio spelling out the fact that they have applied for a grant for work at the Tracer Museum of $100,000 from the Mass Historic, which is a beautiful thing.
After a brief discussion, members made a vote.
All members in favor.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a little bit of discussion.
Okay.
Do we need or should we say anything about the grant?
You're going to make a contingent? I don't think you can do that.
I think then we could have a little discussion before we vote on it. It's my understanding from the letter saying that when the grant is approved or for all or partial of the grant request, then that will automatically be reducing the amount we appropriate tonight, and we can then transfer the money back into the general appropriation. That was my understanding.
Right.
Okay, so if we can amend the motion to say any grant funds that are received would reduce the allocation.
Dollar for dollar?
Dollar for dollar.
Fair enough?
Okay.
Okay. We're fine with you? Okay, yet again, motion made and seconded. Everyone clear on what we're voting on?
Are we voting on the amendment or just the whole thing amended?
I think we'll just vote on the whole thing. Yeah, whole thing as presented and amended. Anyone, any other questions? Seeing none, all members in favor of the motion for the preservation of the Tracer Museum in the sum of $217,894 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous.
Next on the agenda was a lengthy discussion regarding funding for repairs at Hyannis Public Library.
The request before us is for a total of a maximum of $135,315 with a low range of $129,315. Certain contingencies in there on sill replacement. So there is a maximum request of $135,315. Just for the record, I think we should have Mr. Houghton come forward and explain that this is a one-time grant given to these entities.
Attorney David Houghton explained the detail of that request.
When an applicant, the owner of a private structure, like a library, comes forward and applies for funds, and in return for those funds, they grant us and the state a historic restriction on the property. That is the one and only time they can come forward for that structure for historic funds under the Act.
Well, that flows out of the requirement that in order to expend public funds on a private, otherwise private property, there needs to be a public benefit. Since a private property that was improved for, say, historic purposes, could change those, subject to any other permitting requirements, could change those historic features at will, since it's private property. So therefore, in my opinion, in order to obtain a public benefit or a public benefit that can be achieved with respect to private property would include a restriction, so that the public entity then has a say over whether or not the historic features that have been preserved with public funds will be maintained and not be changed. Other forms of public benefit could be, with respect to a private property, public access. I suppose in the case of if we're talking about the library, there certainly there is public access to a library, but the extent to which that public access can be controlled by a private entity, I think needs to be, would need to be examined before one could say that public access alone is a sufficient public benefit to allow the expenditure of public funds on an otherwise private facility. Also, in the case of the Community Preservation Act, the act does specifically require that, at least with respect to private property, a perpetual restriction under Chapter 184 be placed on properties. So you essentially have two reasons for a restriction with under the Community Preservation Act. One, the need for a public benefit, and two, the requirement under the Act that a restriction be placed. If the public benefit is the restriction, once you have obtained that restriction, then what further benefit is there to the public if future funds are sought to be advanced? You've got the restriction. What else are you buying if you've already got the restriction?
Committee member Laura Schufelt expressed support for the project.
Library is a anchor on Main Street. I think it always has been, and I would definitely be in favor of funding this to maintain this building that is so important to the town and so visible and historic that and that we identified these needs, brought our consultant in to look at it, and this will hopefully save the building, and I think that it's important to fund this.
The committee approved $135,000 to fund repairs to the Hinckley House at Hyannis Public Library. No funds will be released until a historic restriction is on record. Next up, a request to fund repairs to the old Selectmen's Building.
Basically, what happened is we submitted a CPC application dated August 24th. And part of that, I guess we were talking with the legal department about some issues that were fundable under CPC and not fundable under CPC. With that, there was a determination that if we increased the amount of work, that the entire project could be funded by CPC. So we submitted a letter in between there that was never formally released to you because I got put on hold by Department of Public Works.
Speak nice and loudly now.
So we're still looking at the total project cost under phase one of $145,093. That was originally submitted to you under the CPC application, which gave, and there's a matching fund of $59,815, which the original CPC application was for a total of $85,278 we were asking you to fund. Based on what Mr. Canavazzi just said, that there were some issues with ADA access, and that ADA access value under site work was $26,200. So if DPW is willing to fund that amount to alleviate the issue with the ADA access, the total that we're asking CPC to fund under that project would be $59,078. Just happens to be close to the matching fund, which is $59,815.
The Community Preservation Committee approved that request, which will pay for phase one of work on the Selectmen's Building. The committee also gave the nod to $107,000 to make repairs to the JFK Museum on Main Street in Hyannis. In an attempt to quell sales of stolen goods and help police to track and recover stolen items, the rules governing secondhand dealers are changing. The licensing authority approved those adjustments on Monday. The new regulations, which require secondhand dealers to photograph items individually and keep electronic logs, are now in effect. You can view the entire licensing board hearing by visiting the archive video section of the town's website. With Barnstable Today, I'm Sarah Colvin.